Hey folks, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you, you can unlock unlimited access to political news, commentary, opinion, and a whole lot more at inforum.news/port for only 99 cents a month for your first 3 months. Hurry, get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes, empowering our vehicles, to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk, recording live at the NDGOP State Convention, and we just finished up. I don't think I'm breaking the news to you, but John Hoeven won the Senate endorsement. I think if we roll back the clock about 6 months, nobody ever thought that there would be a question that John Hoeven would win the state endorsement, but Rick Becker made it a question. Hoeven won comfortably, but it was close, I think it's fair to say. A lot of people, also all-time record for the number of delegates at this convention, which is just remarkable. So lots of interesting thing happens. Chad, what'd you see?
Yeah, I think that it sort of went the way we expected it to, with Hoeven winning close. 54-46, a couple hundred delegates. Becker brought a tremendous amount of energy. I think he probably gave the speech that got the crowd most excited. But at the end of the day, Hoeven's supporters weren't as loud as the Becker supporters, but their votes counted just as much.
Votes don't have to be loud.
No, they don't.
They just have to count.
Yep.
So it was really, Becker came up at the end and conceded. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't expect him to, because this was a brutal race in some ways. And a race that Becker took very personally in some ways. If you stopped by, I don't know if you were at the convention last night, but if you stopped by his booth, he had like almost like a complaint board up of all what he felt were the lies or the misrepresentations of his record. And it had like it was like from a movie where somebody's trying to solve the murder, and it had like red strings connected and everything. He really took a lot of that personally. And first of all, I got to tell you, you can't operate if you're going to be in the United States Senate, you better be able to not take things personally.
Well, and I think, Rob, you pointed out during his speech that much of his speech was dedicated to things that he thought the Hoeven campaign and Pat Finken specifically have said to him, said about him that are not fair. I turned to you and said, this doesn't sound like a winning campaign when you're like airing the grievances from the stage. But he ended strong and got the delegates excited. Yeah,
he did spend a significant, I don't know percentage, 20%, a third of his speech talking about Pat Finken, who isn't ever going to be on the ballot.
Nope.
And anytime a candidate starts talking about somebody, a critic who's not even on the ballot, you're going to have problems.
Well, and one of my observations about the Hoeven campaign is I thought Kevin Kramer did a much better job. Kevin Kramer seconded John Hoeven's speech. Kevin Kramer did a better job of selling John Hoeven than John Hoeven did, because I think Kevin Kramer's more comfortable in sort of this raw confrontational environment than Senator Hoeven is.
Hoeven is a behind-the-scenes guy. And the thing is I don't think, what's more important, that you're an effective lawmaker or that you're really good at firing up a crowd? Ultimately, it's that you're a competent policymaker. But the thing is that a lot of times firing up the crowd is what allows you to be a competent policymaker. So
yeah, I also thought Hoeven's video where it really focused in on the Trump support and like quote specifically about John Hoeven.
I was laughing, and I think because at that point it kind of felt like Hoeven was trolling the Becker crowd, which is a very, very Trumpy, very pro-Trump crowd. And it kind of seemed like he was trolling.
But the line from Trump where it was, you don't hear much from him, he just gets the job done.
Right.
Or whatever.
Which Hoeven then re-echoed later in his speech.
And that was like the whole point of not talk, action. That's who John Hoeven is. I thought the Trump stuff made me cringe, but I think was very effective.
However you feel about Trump, smart politics.
Absolutely.
In this room.
Yeah.
Where do you think Hoeven's bid would have been without Kramer?
So I think I've mentioned this throughout the day. I don't think there's a lot of swing voters in that room, but maybe it sort of calmed down some of the people who might have got caught up in the Becker energy.
Kramer went to the mattresses twice. Really, he spoke from the floor during the fight over. And for people listening to this, you got to remember the convention started with a fight over who was going to chair the convention.
It only took 4 hours to get off.
And it only took us till 3:00 in the afternoon to figure out who was going to chair the convention. And the reason why there was such a food fight over that is because there was a feeling that they want to do all sorts of crazy rule changes, and they wanted to say that whoever was endorsed at the convention was going to be. I mean, really, it was all in advance of Becker's interests, and they were trying a lot of rule changes. And if they had gotten their person, Gary Emeneth, former chairman of the party, to be chair of the convention over current party chairman Perry Schaefer, they would have won. So at one point during that debate, Kevin Kramer gets up and kind of tells. He went to the mattresses. I'm trying to remember specifically what he said, but it was essentially,
Schaefer's doing a good job here, and we need to stop complaining.
Right, and we need to stop the infighting and some of the invective and stuff like that. And
and it was interesting. Kevin Kramer was the person who got shouted down the most, and it wasn't that many shouting down, but during that when he was talking then, somebody's yelling, "Point of order! Why does he get to give a speech and nobody else does?"
Right, and he got some boos during his endorsing speech for Hoeven.
Well, and somebody yelled BS at him during the discussion.
Somebody yelled very loudly a curse word,
and it wasn't BS.
And it wasn't BS. So that was it. And I will say I expected a lot more sort of booing and heckling and angry stuff, and I just didn't hear it.
So I wonder if there wasn't because people were tired. By the time we got to the Senate vote, I mean, they finished the tallying after 5 o'clock. That vote was supposed to take place at 1 o'clock. I wonder if people weren't just like, let's get this thing done. So maybe people were less heckling and whatever. I mean, I think it's important that the chairman vote did take 4 hours. There's problems with the ballots and that happen with private organizations. When there's 2,500 delegates, the biggest that the GOP
when it's 2,500 delegates, and also one side is I mean obviously both sides are going to be watching like hawks, but one side is very much any even honest mistake is going to be perceived as some terrible slight or corruption or somebody.
And it was also confusing because Schaefer's name was on the ballot. Emeneth got nominated from the floor. So I think there's some confusion on how the ballot worked, even though it didn't seem that confusing to me.
It didn't, but they kept making announcements about it. I guess apparently it was super confusing for some people. So I don't know how that worked. But it was interesting to me. So for instance, Doug Burgum spoke, and I expected for the amount of, I don't know that there's anybody in the world who hates Doug Burgum more than Rick Becker hates Doug Burgum, right? Just cannot stand the man. And so obviously Becker's got a big crowd here. And I was expecting when Doug Burgum was up there, because Doug Burgum addressed, and to be fair, Doug Burgum delivered a speech as time filler while we're all trying to figure out the all-important convention chair vote. But Burgum gets up there and doesn't get booed at all.
Well, it's because this whole time was just bashing Joe Biden.
Well, that's and I think
about anything in the state.
I think that was by design, because what's the one thing that's going to unify everybody in that room? Joe Biden sucks.
And the only people who did stand up for Doug Burgum was the delegation from District 2, which was all Becker supporters, and I think voted no on everything. That
District 2 is the Sons of Liberty from Tioga area, and they had 92 delegates here and voted en masse, and stood en masse and sat en masse. I mean, they were in lockstep.
Political machine up there in District 2, evidently.
Funny how that works, by the way. That was a really interesting upshot from this convention as well, is that the accusation against the establishment, Hoeven and et cetera, and apparently Kevin Kramer now too. Although how Kevin Kramer was never part of the establishment baffles me, given how long he's been involved in state politics.
Executive director of the party, the
chairman of the party,
PSC for
House candidate a bunch of times, and then ultimately a congressman, ultimately a senator. It doesn't get more establishment, but he's very good at playing the outsider.
But it's because he says wacky stuff sometimes.
He does.
I think that plays to people.
He's not exactly buttoned down, but he's definitely establishment. But the funny, where was I even going with? Oh, so like the idea is like there's this political machine that's doing everything, but the machine I saw here was the Becker people, right? Like who was the voting bloc, right? Who was well organized? Who was all
Well, and even when they started they gavelled into the convention, and then they took a lunch break before they started.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, we gavelled in, we did the Pledge of Allegiance, we did the national anthem, we did a prayer, and then we went to lunch.
Yeah, but even when they came back from the lunch break and they're voting on the chairman and other things, the Becker folks were lined up at the microphones, ready to roll with point of orders. Some of them weren't very timely with the questions that were before them, but yeah, it was an interesting start. And I think that sort of set the framework for the Senate race. I mean, we sort of knew where it was going to land after the Schaefer-Emmenith thing. But yeah, it may be a little calmer than I would have guessed, but landed where I thought it would land.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I came in thinking Hoeven was going to win, and he won.
Yeah.
And let's be clear, by the middle of June, it was always going to be Hoeven.
Yeah, John Hoeven was going to be the senator from North Dakota when this was all done, regardless of what happened today.
Right, and despite the Democratic nominee as well.
Yeah, and again, I think Katrina did a really nice job last weekend.
I think a Democrat. I think she's very courageous. I saw it. It seemed like she was a little upset with me because when I wrote my column about her thing, I used the word bromides. That she had kind of, because she did. It was kind of like Hoeven's an empty suit. Well, gosh, we've been hearing that for a long time. That doesn't seem to be getting a lot of traction.
I thought her speech was good and made some good points.
I did. Yeah. I think that's fair. I like Katrina. I wasn't trying to be hard on her. Yeah. I think she was a little upset with me though because I used that. I accused her of using some bromides, and then I saw her on Twitter, like, well, these are the real bromides. It's like okay,
throwing the word back. Yeah.
Sorry. Katrina, if you're listening, I really like you. I think you're awesome. I think it's very brave to stand up and do what you're doing. Somebody's got to run that race. I'm glad you had the courage to do it. I wouldn't vote for you, and I know that I'm not trying to insult you. You're not my cup of tea, but it's supposed to be a competitive process. You're fulfilling a duty. Somebody's got to do it.
I mean, the other thing, again, I think the variance, the difference between the two state conventions was really, really.
It's not the same league.
No. I mean, you had probably the smallest M convention that I ever remember.
And then the largest in state history. Yeah. I mean, it's.
And we talked about this some last week. I mean, this stuff's driven by candidates. This stuff is driven by personalities. I mean, Ed Schaefer turned this party around. Rick Becker and John Hoeven brought their people out today because it was a competitive race. Speaking of Ed Schaefer, he was giving the keynote speech after the Senate race.
I felt terrible for Ed Schaefer, who after like the big buildup was who's going to win, Hoeven Becker, we hold the vote, and then people start marching out of the room.
It's after 5 o'clock.
Because everybody's tired, and poor Ed Schaefer's up there playing to that room. I love Ed Schaefer. Yep. I loved listening to his speech. Every time Ed Schaefer has something to say, I'm going to listen because I think he's a great man. But I felt bad for him being in that spot.
There was at one point during his speech where he made a joke that I laughed out loud at, and it occurred to me I might be one of the few people who's paying attention right now to his speech. And
well, the thing is everybody also wants to talk about what just happened.
Yeah, exactly.
People that's the thing. People wanted to go.
Results. It was close. I mean, so anyway, I'm sure Ed Schaefer's speech was great.
I kept my famous spreadsheet.
Yeah.
That at every convention I keep a spread because the notorious thing is they go, if you've never been to a convention, they announce the vote totals for each district, and there's 47 districts. So it's the district chair reads out the vote like Becker 12, Hoeven 15, 1 absent.
It's and so then, fun.
And then well it builds but the problem with it is like keeping track like how many. So what I do is I do a spreadsheet and then I share the link to it on Twitter, and I've had like 200 people watching me update a spreadsheet.
And it's my understanding you couldn't spell the word spoil properly.
Yeah.
And your final count was off by 10 votes.
Senator Kristen Roars had to listen. I put out the caveat that it's an unofficial count. All right. I made one mistake in one district. I was off by 10 votes. Okay.
I think it was my district.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. So anyway, so that was good. I think it was. To your point, how can it be bad for the Republican Party to have this many people here?
It can't be.
I mean, I realize like all the focus, and I've certainly been focused on it, where with the infighting and people upset with each other and everything else, and that's not good. And I think some of what's motivating some of the people that are participating are things that I don't agree with at all. But
here's the deal: the Republican Party had 2,500 people, 2,400 people, all who are paying delegates, all who got to participate for the first time. There is nothing bad for the GOP. It's probably uncomfortable for John Hoeven, but in the long run, it's probably better. For
and I will say, I love competitive endorsements. I never have a problem with somebody thinking I can do it better than the incumbent, and I'm going to go and I'm going to make my case. Never have a problem with that. I think that's good. I think that's healthy. I think as long as the Republican Party is allowing that to happen, they're going to continue to thrive.
Well, and I think that both candidates talked about their differences. They are different Republicans. There's no doubt that John Hoeven and Rick Becker are different Republicans. They pointed out their differences. Obviously, each side thought they were unfair the way the differences were pointed out. That's the way a campaign works.
Right. And really, it's a microcosm for what's going on in the Republican Party. What does it mean to be a Republican in the Trump era?
Yeah.
It's an open question. My answer is probably not going to be the same as a lot of Republicans' answers. Right. There's lots of answers. So that's a difficult thing that Republicans are grappling with, and they grappled with it here today. I mean, in a lot of ways, this race was a proxy for that. What do you think happens? Do you think, I mean, Becker gave up, and I was surprised he gave a concession speech. I thought he was going to have, he takes things really personally. I didn't know he was going to get up and do it. He did it. And by the way, credit to him for doing that. That's a good move.
So I think part of the deal here is he got into the race and was really helpful to his legislative candidates. I wonder if having a competitive primary would be just the opposite, would be more helpful for the establishment candidates if John Hoeven was running at full board.
And people knew they had to get out to get Hoeven. That's probably true.
I don't know if that's what Becker's thinking, or if he just understands that John Hoeven will raise more money than God. He's got an 80% approval rating.
Right. I don't know. Becker said some mixed messages in his thing. I mean, on one hand, he was like, I really believe in the unity, and we all got to do better at communicating with each other. But then also came out and said, this is a war, and we got to fight. Like these are divergent ideas.
I mean, I think the idea behind him coming out and saying I'm for unity is a good idea. I'm not sure he's the best messenger, or can be the best messenger for unity within the Republican Party. Earlier, you said how much he despises the current sitting governor. I think it's hard to talk about unity.
He does. Yeah. Nobody hates Burgum like Becker hates Burgum. I mean, you hear him. It's like his voice finds another octave. So that was really interesting. How likely do you? I mean, because his plea was stay involved, stay in the party. Keep fighting.
Yeah.
You think they will?
Because I think a lot depends on if other candidates are victorious and if other candidates can pick up that Becker mantle, right? Is this about Rick Becker or is this about a bigger movement? I don't know the answer to that.
Let's do the scorecard because they started this spring or last spring, and with the reorganization of the district, and they were going to elect new district chairs and everything else. And by my count, they lost ground. And if we're being charitable, you could say they broke even. But they put a lot of effort in it, had a lot of people show up. And then also they poured a lot of effort into getting delegates to this convention. And they had a lot of people come here. I'm assuming they spent some money on it. And for all of that effort, so we're talking about a year and a half worth of effort. What do they get?
Yeah, well, you skipped over one thing. You skipped over the legislative endorsement, where I think they did find success. I mean, they were able to knock out Bob Erbely down in 28. Who's going to the primary? I mean, they
knocked out Jessica Bell.
Yeah, Elke up in 15, and they've won some other District 35.
Yeah, they kept Cleary out in 35.
Yeah, so I think that's one place where they've seen success.
That's true.
The question is, in June, can they
maintain
that?
But they haven't seen success yet because June is the final word.
Absolutely.
So I guess the scorecard's not complete yet.
Yep.
But I mean, if they don't put up some W's in June.
Well, and then I think the question becomes, okay, so even if they lose in June, have they damaged their candidates, the moderate establishment candidates in a district like 35? I mean, are they going to go after Sean Clear in a way, or whoever the nominee is, that allows Tracy Potter to be more competitive and win? I don't know the answer.
Because Cleary had to move, had to maybe move.
Or do these Becker supporters get so mad at Cleary for being an establishment guy? Do they not vote in that race or something like that?
Becker called for unity, though.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm sure they're all listening.
I'm sure. Well, a lot of them weren't in the room, and that's the other interesting thing. Now, this is some arcane Republican history, but Jared Hendricks, who's kind of the mastermind behind a lot of this organizing that's going on, he's a consultant for the Becker campaign, and you could see him working the floor all day right in front of us. And the really interesting thing about that is that he did this before in 2012. And that was kind of his first convention in the state. He came.
Ron Paul?
He came here as part of the Ron Paul movement. And so they were trying to do the same thing, like kind of take over legislative districts. and make them very in the Ron Paul part of the Ron Paul movement. And that's what they did is they came to a convention. They were all hyped up. They want to do rule changes. They want to do all this stuff. He didn't have the numbers, and he led about 150 delegates to walk out. Blair Thorson, who was running for PSC that race, related a very funny story to me. He was running for PSC, and he said that Jared Hendricks came up to him and promised him. He says, he goes, I know you're not really a Ron Paul guy, but you've never, you haven't, said that we should be kicked out of the party or anything. So we have a slate of 150 candidates who will vote for you, right? And so Blair's like, okay, right? I'm not going to say no to people voting for me. And so what happened, though, is that they got mad over the rules thing and left. And Blair lost the PSC nomination by like 120 votes, 120 delegate votes. So today, what happened immediately after Becker lost?
Well, I don't know if those were just Becker people.
Okay, but
I think there's a lot of people leaving.
Okay,
from both sides.
but let's use District 2 as our bellwether.
Okay, did they all leave?
You walked by on the way
I wasn't
out.
paying attention. Are they?
The seats are all empty.
It's a long drive to District 2.
The seats are all empty. The convention is still doing their work. The convention is still doing the work. They have other granted, they're not unopposed.
But then they have platforms and resolutions, which can be a place of fighting.
Well, the thing is, if you're committed to the party, then be committed to the party. You're a delegate. You chose to represent your district. District 2 is not being represented in there right now, at least not by very many people. Certainly not anything approaching the 92 delegates they brought.
Yeah.
So,
but that again, do they want to be part of the Republican Party moving forward, or is it just this movement that they want to be a part of?
This moment in time.
Yeah, exactly right. And again, I go back to, is this about Rick Becker, or is this about something bigger? Can this movement continue after Rick Becker is no longer in office?
Right. And so what does Rick Becker do? I guess maybe that's our last question.
I think he goes back-to-back TV and continue. He's probably got more influence on the outside than he did on the inside of the legislature, for sure.
I've always argued that a lot of the people like in the Becker crowd wouldn't know what to do if they ever actually won.
Or if they're in the majority. I mean, being in the majority is hard, but no, I think there's something to be said about Becker's influence being more influential outside the system than within the system. Could
be true. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm not sure how much longer he's going to stay involved. But maybe. Yeah. Maybe. I mean, I was wrong. I didn't think he was going to run for the Senate either.
Yeah, I didn't.
Although I was also taking him at his word at what he said. So I think he changed his mind. I think at one point he was going to do one thing and then he changed his mind. So if he's going to be changing his mind and everything, I don't know. I don't know what he's going to be doing.
I'll be honest, though. When he announced he was running for the U.S. Senate, I didn't envision this being as close as it ended up being.
Yeah. Although the one caveat I'm putting on that, and it doesn't explain it all, and I'm not trying to take anything away from Becker, who obviously they did a ton, and Hendricks and the rest of them, they did a ton of work. They got a ton of people here. But, by the time he got in late, and by the time he got in, Hoeven didn't know that Becker was going to be running delegates until about a third of the delegates had already been chosen.
Yeah.
So that made it tough for Hoeven. I mean, you can't undo some of that, right?
Yeah.
It was already, So anyway, so that was interesting. So that wraps up the NDGOP state convention. It was a lot of fun.
It was so much fun. I mean, it was boring at times. But, I mean, when the votes are coming in and you're sort of analyzing what districts these votes are from and whatever, that's really great stuff.
For me, I get to meet a ton of, readers and stuff. I get to meet a ton of people who I don't get to see very often.
Sure.
Maybe like the email, or I see them tweeting at me or posting on Facebook or something. It's nice just to meet them in person. Like I spend a ton of time just shaking people's hands. Like people just coming up, are you Rob Port? I read your stuff all the time.
I regret not videotaping the woman who walked by multiple times.
There was the woman.
You if you got paid for your lies.
If I had she walked by one time and asked me if I had my lies ready to go. She doesn't understand this is an art form. I'm kidding. I'm not writing lies.
It was fun watching people who, not a lot of middle ground with the Republican delegates on Rob Port. Either love him or hate him. And I told people I have far more people at the Dem convention that hate me than the Republican convention because not a lot of people there know who I am.
Yeah, I'm not gonna make it. Chad's gonna come to the dark side eventually.
There's no way, particularly after today and seeing some of the people in that crowd, I can't imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. I enjoy it, and obviously, I'm a nerd about this stuff, so I like the procedural stuff. I think it's interesting. Because this is ultimately the process. This isn't. I think sometimes people treat this like it's all just a bunch of folderol going on, but it's not.
Yep.
Like this is how candidates get selected, right? This is how it happens. This isn't a game. This matters.
And I think one of the things coming out here with Hoeven winning, does that mean they're less likely to get rid of the endorsing convention moving forward? I mean, that's the question that they've been grappling with.
I mean, knee jerk, not having thought about it a ton. I want to say it probably makes it less likely that they're going to change anything.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Hoeven showed you could still win,
You can still win if you do the work.
That's what I would prefer. Like, I don't like if you're because I am very much not on the Becker side of. I don't understand their motivations. I don't understand the culture war stuff. I think it's hurtful. I think it's harmful. I don't think it's a good long-term strategy for the party. But I would like to beat that at the district conventions. I'd like to beat that at the state conventions. I'd like to see normal Republicans, the sort of Republicans who have led this party to 30 years of success. I want to see them show up and win.
But it is so much harder for those normal Republicans to win at the convention than it is to win at the June primary.
Well, especially because again, the tactic at the conventions, and particularly at the district convention, is go in, turn it into chaos, make it last till 2 o'clock in the morning until your people are the only people left, and then you win.
Yep.
And that sucks. I hate that. Because it should be. It's like winning at the legislature because you just talked longer and everybody gave up and went home.
Well, and maybe that's one of the reforms they need to look at. That should be the first thing on the agenda.
How do you? I don't know. Well, what's the reform?
I don't know.
How do you address? I don't know either. We'll have to. That'll be for another episode.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, thanks for tuning in. We had a lot of fun here. Even Chad had fun.
No, super
at the
fun.
Republican convention.
There's so you and I have talked about.
It's a Super Bowl for political nerds.
Yeah, and there are so many Republican legislators in particular who I have good relationships with, and it's good to have an opportunity to chat with them. So it was a fun day.
Which honestly is the whole reason I'm doing this. Is I want to have good conversations with smart people, whatever their point of view. Just grown-up people who take this stuff seriously. Anyway, that's it. We're out from the NDGOP convention. Thanks for listening.